Welcome everyone to our next talk as part of CPO Mastery Series Conference, where we're joined by Rapha Cohen, the Chief Product Officer at Google Waze. Rapha will be talking about HOSKR, a Better-Than-OKR framework. Rapha, I'll have you take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Rapha Cohen and I run product for Waze. I'm thrilled to be with you today. Some of you may already have heard me talk about HOSKR. Today I'll bring a couple of new simplified examples following some of the very good feedback from my last talks on that topic. Also try to talk more slowly. That's also a feedback I got. Thank you for bearing with me. We'll talk about frameworks today. So after engineering school, I discovered business frameworks like Porter's 5 Forces and Hambrick and Fredrickson's Strategy Diamond, you're probably familiar with, and I fell in love with them. So don't judge me for falling in love with something so apparently boring. I realized that a good framework truly accelerates thinking and can compensate for my laziness, lack of intelligence, shortage of creativity, and more generally to avoid the psychological biases that we all got, right? So I don't mean to educate such an illustrious crowd about the value of setting good OKRs. Really, if your team doesn't take OKRs seriously, do something about it. Read the OKR Bible from John Doerr, and you'll see your life will get so much better. I mean, literally your life. I even set OKRs for my personal life with high-level objectives I deem as important, like be a healthy person, for instance, and measurable key results. Run 10K in 45 minutes, sitting rate at desk below 40%, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a picture of my fridge showing only the non-embarrassing OKRs. So the beauty of OKRs is that they connect high-level holistic objectives with measurable and indisputable achievements. So unfortunately, OKRs' usefulness depends on what you're using them for. They're fantastic for organizations, for teams, for individuals. But when I started my journey in the product management business, I quickly realized they lacked a few important characteristics to be truly useful in product development and feature development. So let's talk about some of the limitations of OKRs. First, OKRs don't really tell you how to connect your objective and your key results. If, for instance, you have a very laudable objective around developing your relationship with your teenagers, for instance, you may set a key results of posting a certain amount of Instagram posts on a daily basis so you can impress them. You may even hit this goal, but it's not 100% sure that your objective will be reached, right? Like the KR is there, but the objective is not reached necessarily. Secondly, OKRs don't tell you anything about your ability to hit your key results. So, for instance, I may want to win a gold medal in athletics at the next Olympics, for instance, but it doesn't mean that I can actually achieve that goal, right? It doesn't just fit my lifestyle. More importantly, and this is the primary topic of this talk, OKRs don't tell you if your objectives actually matter. Why? Why is it so important to achieve this or that objective? So from my experience, the connection between objectives, key results, and your worldview is typically not very important for organizations. So the objectives are usually more or less clear. For instance, you work for Intel, you want to sell chips. You work for Philip Morris, your objective is to sell more cigarettes. And you don't need much more in order to deliver good key results, right? It's the relationship between the objective and the measurable key results is actually pretty clear. I will argue, though, that context is what will make a world of difference between good and great OKRs. So back to college, because I had to take breaks from Fourier transforms and differential equations, I started to develop a very basic and shallow interest for philosophy. And of course, I would start summarizing the books I read into single slide frameworks, just because I could. So I reckon that most 800 pages of books from a German philosopher could be better explained with less than 4 rectangles and 5 arrows. So for Schopenhauer, life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom. So here's your diagram. Hegel conceives change as a progression of ideas following a known pattern. Those are dialectics. Marx has a materialistic conception of history and human society, and so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. So in the case of product development, having an hypothesis of what motivates people in a world where your product doesn't exist and how you would like the world to look like if your product did exist and it was successful, it was a hit, what I will call a worldview, is something that I consider critical in setting the right goals for your product. You need context and you need a worldview. And OKRs can't help you with that. So let's take one concrete and very quick example from Waze. Let's assume you have a business objective to have users to drive more with the app. This is a straightforward objective, and as a PM, you need to get to work and deliver on that goal. So a bad PM will, of course, start from the feature. Like all bad PMs, you don't start from the outcome, you start from the feature. And you say, hey, let's put virtual goodies on the road and have people make detours to win them. The more goodies you get, the more points you get, the more points you get, the more points you have, or whatever. Let's make the game addictive enough so people drive more, even if they don't really need to, right? They will make detour. So the universe in which you're successful looks like this: chaos on roads. Is this really what you intended for your users and for society? This is like the question you need to ask yourself. If you're a good PM, you will set OKRs. You will set metrics, such as driven miles per user. You will start brainstorming with engineers, analysts, designers about an idea which could move the needle on this KPI based on the value you bring to users. As an intelligent person, you will quickly recognize that it doesn't make sense to have people drive if they don't have anywhere to go or if they don't need to. Logically, you will decide to focus on miles per session, a session that's happening anyway. You'll end up with some idea improving the end of drive experience, probably around parking, for instance, to make sure users don't close Waze before they arrive at their destination. And this is how you plan on moving the needle on the specific KPI you defined and deemed as important. So you're data-driven, you look at the data, you see that 50% of users don't complete their drives with Waze open. Set a goal to improve this by half. You may even be successful in your endeavor and get promoted. Maybe what you did is create a new parking experience. Maybe what you did is improve battery life or whatever, but you're successful and you move the needle on your KPI. So you're a good PM. If you're a product philosopher, you will have some informed worldview and the context around the propensity people have to become altruistic towards their own group in the face of adversity and to develop animosity towards strangers. So this is a worldview that you have, right? Like this is how you understand the world. And this is your starting point from which you start when you get to your feature developments. So you will also think how miserable people feel every day when they commute in traffic. You'll dream of making their lives a little bit better because you believe that solving their problems is the only way to achieve your own goals. You'll connect these ideas, you'll build up some hypothesis that knowing what's en route reduces anxiety and stress and creates a delightful experience. You'll bet that users in traffic will think of themselves as a tribe fighting against the common enemy, the traffic monster, and that they will want to help each other, reporting what's en route, making other Wazers' lives better, and increasing the value they get from it. You'll build a better UI for allowing users to report what's en route, traffic, accidents, potholes, and whatnot, and close the loop to let them know how they helped their fellow Wazers. We'll hope that they will the value that this creates will be compelling enough to make users use Waze, even if they know how to get to the destinations, just to know what's coming ahead on their route. You'll end up building a radically different, and I will argue better product that will ultimately build a world-class company, because you can imagine how the world looks with and without your feature. Right? So that's the difference between starting from the objective and starting from the worldview, starting from the context, starting from your user's motivation, understanding them in depth, and thinking about the impact that your product will have on this worldview. So worldviews have a pitfall. Be careful. There's one pitfall to most worldviews. Making one's worldview evolve is not something that seems to be desirable for some reason. So philosophers, like politicians, are a stubborn creature. Politicians, their career would probably be over if they change their mind. So it will often look like they try to bend reality to force it into their framework. So while product managers will need a worldview in order to build great products, we'll see how in a moment, they will also need to make sure it remains flexible and adaptive. This is why we have statistics, or the science of changing your mind under uncertainty. Think about it this way. As opposed to politicians, your career will be over if you are not able to change your mind based on data. So it's risky, but there is simply no alternative to having a worldview. Every data practitioner knows that without data, you're just another person with an opinion, but everyone forgets that without an opinion, you're just another person with data. An opinion is a worldview, and this is an absolute must for every feature and product developments. So before we talk about how we develop product in the context of a worldview, let's start simple and talk about the other gaps in OKR setting. First, assume you have the right objective. How do you set the right key results? So Google has a less known framework used specifically for product development, and I think it's super powerful. It's called Goals, Signals, Metrics. I won't dig too deep, but in a nutshell, goals and objectives are the same. And they're still the input into the framework. You start from the goal, from the objective. How do you want users to engage with your product? The output is different though. The goal of this framework is to use product managers and designers to find the right metrics for measuring success. It's not to actually put a target on it, it's just to define the right metrics. How can you capture data about your signals? Unsurprisingly, there's a great framework for picking those two. You have HOT, happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success, which I think is very useful because it forces PMs to think about both users and business goals. So from my experience, most PMs have a propensity to naturally favor one of the other. So this framework comes in extremely handy in many situations. So Google this HOT framework. It's super helpful. There's plenty of material online, and I won't dig too deep into it. So back to goal signals metrics. What I think makes this framework so powerful, though, is the step between goals and metrics, the signal. This is a classic philosopher move. Think of the world in which your goal is achieved. What does it look like qualitatively? I often ask those questions to my team. Tell me the story. Describe the world you created. How do people behave? What is the impact on the universe? For instance, what other problems will you create? Are you happy with this outcome? Are you happy with the story? So after you do this, translating the qualitative goal into a metrics becomes a straightforward exercise. GSM is a strong framework because it ensures you are building product aligned with your values. Now you have the right metrics. You can move forward and set measurable goals. Put tags on the metrics or KPIs. And here comes the second pitfall. How can you estimate before you build something what is the impact on the metrics? So by the way, why do we care so much about having success metrics? You probably already know this if you have some PM experience. It's very easy to explain in hindsight why launch was such a tremendous success if it was yours, right? And you're subject to sunk cost fallacy. And it's also just as easy to explain why it was such a shameful failure, the very same launch, if you were against it to begin with, because you don't like the person who came up with the idea or whatever. So in order to avoid this unpleasant situation, we discussed how success looks like before anyone falls in love with an idea. We never, ever rediscuss it later on. If the key result is not hit, the PM in charge of the feature must pledge to iterate and improve or to kill the features. There is no middle ground. Either iterate or kill. So at Waze, we try to come up with a framework that takes the best of both OKRs and GSM and improves on it further, and came up with HOSKR. So it's largely inspired from both OKRs and GSM. HOSKR is the template for product philosophers, and hence it became the literal template of all of our specs. PM must feel it whenever they want to build something at Waze. They're free to discard anything that's not relevant to the problem they have at hand, but they can't keep thinking about it. Like any good framework, it forces thinking. This is what we want from a framework, right? So HOSKR stands for hypothesis, objective, signal, and key results. With HOSKR, you don't start from an objective, you start from a worldview. In the context of product development, this worldview is the qualitative growth model, which means how your different company KPIs are impacting each other. I've talked on different occasions about those growth models, and I don't want to eat up all the time we have here. So let's remain on the principle level. One needs to have a model of how different actions and value propositions are interconnected in your product. Ideally, this is a quantitative model, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So this is an example of the KPI graph we have at Waze, the fundamental one, the simplest one. Every node in the graph is an action. Every edge is a value proposition. The graph is your worldview. In that example, for instance, the more you plan your drive ahead with Waze, the more time you will save, the more you will drive with Waze. It will create data that will allow us to predict what is your next trip, and you will plan more. You'll plan more time. You'll save more time. You'll save more time. You'll drive, etc., etc. On the second loop is more driving will you'll be able to report and to give more data to Waze, right? And when you report more, the product becomes more valuable to all other users, and they will drive more with Waze. If they drive more with Waze, they will plan more with Waze, et cetera, et cetera. This is how we see the world, right? Like this is how we think users, the product, and the roads behave. So remember, this model doesn't need to be perfect or to fully reflect reality. The more it does, the better your decisions will be. But PMs, being in the business of decision making, there is no such thing as not making a decision. Not making a decision is a decision. So as opposed to generalist philosophers, product philosophers have to do everything to make their worldview evolve through constant experimentation and A/B testing using the marvelous tool we call statistics. So now you have a compounded growth model, or KPI graph, worldview, that changes every time you learn something new about the world, or when you introduce something new into the world, like the ability for users to plan their next trip with Waze, for instance. You constantly run experiments to validate that those effects apply, to what extent, and to separate correlations from causal effects. You express a hypothesis on the relationship between some action you want to enable and the value to the user or to the business. Armed with this broad understanding, happy with the hypothetical universe you're about to create, you set your qualitative objective, just like in OKRs. Same thing. You imagine a universe in which your hypothesis is validated, and an alternate one in which it's not. How do they differ? What happens in each one of them? Which metrics from your hard frameworks move, and in what direction? How does the world look like? So now your hypothesis is validated. Some metrics moved by X%. You look at how it impacts the rates of your business metrics. You still happy? You still want to do this? Yes, move forward. And don't stop until one of the following happens. Either the universe you wanted to create becomes a reality, you're happy, you strengthen your worldview, or you're disappointed, but you learned something new. You updated your worldview and your understanding of reality, and you killed the feature. Either way, the output of the process is an updated worldview. Your worldview evolves all the time based on your learnings. So now let's see how to use HOSKR in real life and see how critical this framework can become, especially if we compare it to classical OKRs. So if you live in Israel, Mexico, Brazil, or the US, you probably heard of Waze Carpool. In a nutshell, the idea of this service is to match people commuting in the same direction so they can share a ride, enjoy a better commute, save gas, money, or even significant time in markets where driving restrictions such as HOV lanes apply. So as a company, our goal is to allow for society to end traffic without having to build more roads, which as we know is a futile objective. The urbanist Lewis Mumford famously said to explain the concept of induced demand that building more roads to prevent congestion is like a fat man loosening his belt to prevent obesity. So making people leave their car at home when they can enjoy the immediate satisfaction or flexibility and the illusion of freedom that comes with it is not an easy task. Like Carpool is really by far the most difficult product I've ever had to build. So let's see how HOSKR can help us crack it. So start with regular OKRs. You're a PM on Carpool and you notice that 65% of rides in Carpool happen between the rider and the driver who already carpooled together in the past. Let's call them X's, right? Start from the data. So like a good PM, you're data-driven, user-centric. You decide to set as an objective to make the experience flawless for pairs of carpoolers who already carpooled together. This is your objective. Being so fundamental to the overall experience, you define this flow as a critical user journey. You worked with UX research to conduct a research to get insights on how people get to their past carpoolers. What are the friction points? You want to improve the funnel. You want to remove this friction. So you build a new feature, favorites, let's assume, which allows users to bookmark their past drivers so they can easily find them and request rides from them time after time after time without having to go through the regular flow. You look at your hard framework, reckon that your feature should impact retention because it will be easier to book rides with the people you know on Waze than scheduling pickup with text messages on WhatsApp and paying with Venmo or whatever, and task success, because doing so will become much easier. So you pick some KPI, like share of rides with past carpoolers, number of rides with past carpoolers, something like that, and set numeric goals for those KPIs. You want to start building the feature, you review the spec with your CPO, and you get sent to do HOSKR and come back, right? CPO is not happy. Now you do the same exercise but with HOSKR. With HOSKR, you already have a worldview before you start thinking about your feature and before you looked at this particular data. And here it is. As a PM, you understand that in carpool, your currency is trust between people who don't know each other and quality of service, the liquidity in the network which allows you to rely on carpools as a commute solution. You talk to many users, you're an expert, in fact, you are yourself a heavy user, you are data inspired, you know that the most critical friction point in carpool is the anxiety people feel under uncertainty. They send a carpool request and they have no idea whether the driver will accept the request. This is the friction. This is why you observe this data, because of your inability to create a predictable experience for your riders. This is your worldview. It's all about predictability. So being a philosopher, you know what the data you looked at means. People tend to request rides from past carpoolers not because this is the best experience one can imagine, but because it's a signal you're doing a poor job at building predictability in an interaction between strangers. And as a result, people don't carpool with many partners, the network dries up, and traffic keeps getting worse. So what you need is to address this uncertainty and this lack of predictability and alleviate this anxiety. So now you get started with your HOSKR. H, hypothesis. By allowing drivers to pre-approve incoming ride requests in exchange for a small financial upside, we will create a predictable and superior experience for riders. Basically, what you want to do is to build Airbnb instant booking for a carpool. This is a feature you shamelessly steal from them. Oh, your objectives. You have a driver-centric objective, fully utilize my car and save more money, right? Because you'll have more riders willing to join my trip. Rider-centric, I can relax and book my commutes. No uncertainty whatsoever, full predictability, and riders are able to instantly join those rides. From the business perspective, you get more favorable unit economics, which is a fancy way to say that riders will be willing to pay more for those pre-approved carpools, right? So you always look at the three dimensions, the two sides of the marketplace and the side of the business. Let's talk about the signal. Let's talk about the signal, pick the one about the riders, for instance. In a world with such a feature, many drivers won't be interested. They're here for the social experience and the money maybe matters less to them. But when such carpools are available, riders will be super interested. All the riders will flock to them. When there are no pre-approved carpools, maybe some of them won't even request a ride and won't even request a carpool, and they will just choose to drive to work. Key results. You pick your metrics and you set a target. So pay special attention to the key results in that case. If your worldview is correct, you expect the share of carpools between strangers to be higher on the account of carpools being existing pairs. What just happened? With your OKR, you would have set an objective to have more users carpool with someone they already know. So in a typical fashion, starting from data and setting OKRs from your feature led to the opposite definition of success than starting from a worldview and an hypothesis for your feature. In the first case, you would set a goal to have more users to carpool with their existing partners. With HOSKR, you will set this as a failure, as the bad signal, because you understand that it's all about predictability, and the data that you observed is a symptom of a problem and not something that you need to improve, not a funnel that you need to improve. So this is why context is so important and why OKRs may be so dangerous when misused. So they might end up destroying your business, literally. So to conclude, I believe the difference between good and great product managers lies in their ability to form a cohesive view of the interactions between the actions allowed by the product and the universe. So be a product philosopher, be an expert in statistics, in machine learning, in UX, in design, in finance, but don't forget to learn about cognitive evolution, sociology, history, anthropology, etc., etc. Those are just as important. You build a worldview and build product that impacts it positively. If the world surprises you and the outcome is different than what your model predicted, adjust your worldview and try again. That's it. Thank you so much for listening, for having me. And here's to a great 2021. Probably my worldview is probably going to be a better year than 2020.
Definitely going to be a better year than 2020, I feel. These are excellent points. And with that, I'd like to conclude the talk. Thank you so much, Rapha, for taking the time to share your knowledge with our audience today I'd also like to thank our global audience who've tuned in from around the world to listen to this talk. Please take the opportunity to give Rapha a big virtual round of applause, and we'll be back for additional
Thank you,
talks.
Mo.
So thank you, Rapha. So stay tuned. Thanks so much, everyone.